hear what you have to say about ethos in modern medicine, Father.
Thank you, Professor. It's a sincere honor to be invited to participate in this historic conference, assembling the finest medical leaders, practitioners, and students of the Aristotle Medical Forum and the Hellenic Medical Diaspora. It would have been an added pleasure to be among you in person. I hope there will be another opportunity in the future. But I did sacrifice some sleep by waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning here for our panel. I'm going to be speaking, of course, from the perspective of Aristotle more than the perspective of Hippocrates. We live in a time and universe where, despite the increasing need for scientific disciplines and social sectors to collaborate for the healing of our planet and its people, we are witnessing a rising fragmentation and even contention among key sources of authority and knowledge. So my first point is quite straightforward, that medicine and faith should be in dialogue with one another. Both seek the curing of sickness and procuring of wholeness through therapy and healing. How can one function in isolation of the other? In the Church, salvation and healing are virtually synonymous. Christ is Savior, healer, and the medicine. So the service of doctors and nurses reflects the ministry of pastors and theologians. Medicine and faith are not in search of different truths. They are complementary approaches to a single reality, the prosperity of humans and the protection of creation. Medicine provides data. It tells us what we are. Faith provides meaning. It tells us who we are. Both medicine and faith, then, possess answers to ultimate questions, but neither should presume any monopoly over these answers. After all, as human beings, no one is ultimately healed in this life, whether medically or miraculously. And as Orthodox Christians, we certainly believe it is only in the age to come that we are completely whole. Illness, whether cancer or heart or diabetes and so on, is part and parcel of this world that the Church calls fallen, which means that it's the condition of creation, but not the will of God. My second point is to bring to your attention a recent document of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The mandate for dialogue between science and religion, or between church and society, is in the DNA of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Patriarch Bartholomew is no stranger to the enterprise of bridging science and religion. In fact, his ecological vision is associated with the broader ecumenical mission of the Church. For the Patriarch, the Church's philanthropy is linked with expanding the limits of faith to enhance the place of human beings on the planet. This openness has always appealed to me in a hierarchical and traditional church that still grapples with the mere mention, let alone adoption, of elementary scientific theories such as evolution. More recently, this call for dialogue gained prominence with the emergence of the pandemic. Just as climate change demonstrated the complicated relationship between religion and science, COVID-19 revealed the uncomfortable relationship between faith and medicine. With the exception of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, whose leader issued an encyclical reassuring Orthodox Christians that COVID in fact threatened the lives of the faithful, not the heart of their faith, the pandemic found the Orthodox churches singularly unprepared, if not unwilling, to respond effectively. With the lockdown of churches and prohibition of Holy Communion, it was difficult to discern whether some religious leaders were more preoccupied with defending medieval treasures from imaginary enemies or promoting superstitious conspiracy theories of global plots against Christianity. What became obvious was the absence of an orthodox ethical guideline. Well, around the same time, the Ecumenical Patriarchate endorsed a document entitled For the Life of the World Toward a Social Ethos of the Orthodox Church, a text that formulates general parameters for the role of the Orthodox Church and the responsibility of Orthodox Christians in the modern world. Though completed before the outbreak of COVID-19, the document offers a much-needed ethos for Orthodox Christians struggling to navigate modern-day concerns. It presents a sustained approach to critical and controversial issues, including the course of human life, gender and bioethics, as well as science and technology. This document is particularly significant because the Eastern Church has conventionally been allergic to such statements, arguably the result of a struggle to secure its place in the world over periods of isolation or persecution in the distant past, particularly behind the Iron Curtain in the recent past. So as a result, Eastern Christianity stopped dealing with questions related to the present and started focusing on answers derived from the past. This proved catalytic in the 19th century when the notion arose of Christianity as fundamentally incompatible with modern science. But this wasn't always the case. The early church had a bold voice on social justice and scientific progress. Church fathers of both East and West respected the medical tradition inherited from Hippocrates and Galen, and hospitals were supported by monasteries in Byzantium. So Basil the Great can advise, we must adopt the art of medicine with great care, not because it is absolutely accountable for our health, but because it reflects the glory of God. It is not inconsistent with one's faith to trust in doctors, says Augustine of Hippo, though his disciple Ambrose criticizes those who turn to God only when the physician's efforts fail. And in his Chronicle of Monasteries, Palladius describes miracle-working monks in Egypt who nonetheless turn to physicians in order to cure ulcers or undergo surgery. In fact, a rare exception is Tertullian, whose question, "What has Jerusalem to do with Athens?" we might translate for our conference as, "What does Hippocrates have to do with Aristotle?" Tertullian believed that earaches and headaches are caused by pride and healed by humility. That he converted to Montanism, a heresy resorting to dualism and reducing faith to magic, finds, unfortunately, parallels in fundamentalists and traditionalists today. But from the very outset, the dynamic element of Christianity was its willingness, its capacity to synthesize, whether faith and philosophy more broadly, or faith and science more specifically, something its intellectual representatives regarded as analogous to the relationship between the body and the soul, while reflecting the tension between heaven and earth. The same spirit, by the way, pervades the patriarchal text for the life of the world that initiates this conversation between church and society as between faith and science, much like we are doing on this panel. My third point involves a degree of self-criticism. While being in dialogue with one another, I firmly believe that medicine and faith, or science and religion, should be distinct from one another. Let me explain. Despite the Church's uneasy encounter with modernity, a number of efforts have sought to engage religion and science. And what has become clear from these initiatives is that tradition retains a normative preeminence in Orthodox Christianity, often romanticized in search of solutions to contemporary problems posed by medicine and technology. However, an uncritical attachment to the past is unhelpful in pursuing a creative and constructive dialogue with modernity. In light of scientific advances, the Church is called, despite ingrained reluctance and resistance sometimes, to review established notions such as sin, sexuality, and morality. But to do so, it must be educated about science and medicine, something that must be done by experts, not bishops. The Church must detach itself from the temptation to predicate and indoctrinate, and such detachment is vital for interdisciplinary dialogue and meaningful engagement with the world. Otherwise, the Church will remain, at best, out of touch with, or at worst, indifferent to, the reality of the world. It is, of course, refreshing that many clergy retain a professional career in medicine, serving as doctors and therapists, or as technicians and nurses. The problem arises, however, when authorities in the Church assume an authoritative or assertive position on medical or scientific questions. The matter is very plain when it involves scientifically uninformed bishops, such as the Metropolitans of Piraeus or Kythera, both of whom had clear positions against pandemic restrictions and vaccinations. But the matter becomes problematic when it concerns more informed bishops, such as the Metropolitans of Mesoia or Nafpaktos. In my humble opinion, it is simply insufficient to compare scientific data with the spiritual domain, superficially juxtaposing medical and ascetical terminology to demonstrate or postulate some association between medicine and faith. It is only when each side enters the conversation without any intent of correcting or converting the other that the dialogue becomes genuine and profitable. And religion should not be threatened by developments in science. How can the Church care for human beings from sexual union and conception through birth and development to illness and death when unaware or ignorant about science, medicine, and psychiatry? I'm not questioning the power of prayer. That's my job. I'm advocating for a clear line of distinction between faith and medicine, much like the separation between church and state. The two must collaborate, but neither should infringe on the other. The Church must honor, learn from, and work with science. It must be grateful that medicine observes what we inherit from parents and what we bequeath to children. It should accept medications and vaccinations by qualified physicians. This too is genuine philosophy and wisdom and faith. And one final remark. Practitioners of medicine and faith are alike subject to respective codes of conduct. Doctors and clergy understand that in their professional service or pastoral ministry, they are obliged to maintain and be measured by moral precepts, whether bound by the Hippocratic oath or else abiding by canon law. The medical ethics of autonomy or confidentiality, of beneficence, of helping others, and of justice, of doing what is right, apply to both professions, albeit from different perspectives and with distinct emphases. Where I would like to see greater emphasis is on the principle of non-maleficence or doing no harm. Doctors and clergy should not succumb to the temptation of vocational greed or corruption, of providing evidence for ulterior purposes, whether personal or financial or political or professional. When sources for medical information or religious authority are convoluted by any agenda, then people are misinformed about fundamental facts, both on matters related to viruses or medications, and on matters related to sexuality and spirituality, resulting in the contention and conflict we have today come to know as culture wars. My dear friends, distinguished panelists, moderators, and participants, engaging with trust in determined and detached dialogue is critical for both medicine and faith. For my part, I am convinced that when faith relates to medicine without preconditions, without expectations, then the sacred yearning for salvation and healing and wholeness is neither diminished nor damaged. It is only enlarged. It is only energized for the benefit of all people and for the life of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father John. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for your speech. Although we made you wake up very, very early in the morning, but we had to do that because we invite you. We know what you're working on, your participation in the Pan-Orthodox Synod in Agia και Μεγάλη, the great synod of the Orthodox Church in Crete in 2006. It was, your contribution there was amazing, so it's always a pleasure to have you. Your speech was divided in 3 parts, and I think through this division, you managed to present the substance of the relation between the ethos and science according to our Orthodox tradition. I would like to only to point out and to underline briefly some points. You started with a crucial and fundamental issue of what is sin and how from sin we can arrive to salvation. And you pointed out that we're not talking about a legal procedure here. It's mainly a pastoral procedure. It's not that we broke a law and then through the penitence we need to reestablish our relation with God and with people in order to achieve the salvation. It's a pastoral thing. It's like the patient who understands his situation, and deliberately, with his consensus, goes to the doctor, as goes to the spiritual father, in order to start a way, in order to arrive to the salvation, a healing way, in order to arrive in this situation, in this healing situation, and finally to meet God through theosis and the salvation. And it's really important because even in the legal texts, the canon law collection of the Orthodox Church, I mentioned here just only John the Scholasticus, starts the introduction not with legal nonsense, of legal theories, but starts exactly with pastoral and with this pastoral approach using medical terminology. And this is amazing according to my opinion. So there's a comparison with a doctor and the spiritual father. This is, this is the base in order to understand how ethos and is conceived from the Orthodox Church, and of course is not the same with morality. Morality is another thing. Ethos is another. Your second point is has to do with this dialogue between science and religion that many times underlined by our ecumenical patriarch. And this is also important because it's not just a dialogue. It's a tool. It's a way in order to resolve crucial issues of nowadays. And this issue is not only the pandemic. is more global, is the climate change, is the ecological problem. So, in other words, according to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, who translate successfully the Orthodox tradition, is that we cannot work alone in this world anymore. It's not the church like a monastery through into the walls. It's open to the globalized world. And of course, to the science, that's a reality, and very useful reality, because also science is a tool that God offers us in our days. And your third point has to do with the conflict, let's say, that is not obvious, a conflict between medicine and faith. And you pointed out that it's not, it's a bi-directional relationship. So it's from one head, the church that needs to understand, to speak, to have this dialogue, this communication, in order to understand really and frankly what science says. And on the other side, the science that must not a priori reject religion and theology and all these frameworks. So may I add the last word that is also, I think, recapitulate the patristic approach of this thing, is the word diakrisis. We need diakrisis in order to achieve to a collaboration, to a real collaboration for the good of the humanity. Thank you very much again for your participation. And now I give the floor to the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Professor Gklavinis. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikos. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Professor Anastasiadis. Although I believe that the constitution of this panel, actually, the way we are sitting now, is somehow imbalanced. Because Takis Vidalis, that I want to present, sitting by me, is a lawyer. And I'm a lawyer.